The stone of Alpha Theron's fortress held 2 years of my silence. I was a ghost in gray wool, a servant girl who knew the only rule for an Omega: be invisible. To be noticed was to be claimed, broken, or discarded, so I perfected the art of fading. My footsteps were whispers on the flagstones. I crushed pungent sage into my skin until I smelled of nothing but hearth smoke and dust. My eyes remained downcast, my voice a memory. Theron was a distant storm, a giant of a man with a crown of dark hair and eyes the color of a thunderhead. I saw him from the shadows during challenge fights, a king who settled disputes with a flash of steel and a final wet gurgle. Others bowed. I dissolved. My mother's last lesson was my scripture: be useful, be silent, be unseen. For 2 years it was enough. I told myself this half-life, this existence of scrubbing and scurrying, was a life. I was wrong. The attack came in the lower corridors, a labyrinth of torchlight I knew better than the lines of my own palms. I was carrying a heavy basket of laundry, my mind adrift. They materialized from an alcove, 3 of them, not Theron's men. Their scent was foreign, cold river stone and bitter ambition. They were from the faction of Elder Garvin, a wolf who thought the throne should be his. No words. One ripped the basket from my arms. The linen scattered like startled birds. A fist, sheathed in leather, cracked into my ribs. The pain was a white-hot star, bursting behind my eyes before the sound of the snap reached my ears. Air fled my lungs in a shocked, silent rush. "A message for your king," a voice hissed, hot and rancid against my ear as I folded. Let him find his little shadow painted in red. They were not gentle. The world narrowed to the impact of boots on my back, my legs, the crushing weight of a knee on my already screaming ribs. I didn't cry out. Sound would make me reel. I bit my tongue until copper flooded my mouth, curling into the smallest ball possible, praying to be boring, to be ignored. Finally, it stopped. A boot prodded my shoulder. He'll know it was us. He'll know what happens when he forgets who the true power is. Their laughter echoed down the corridor as they left, a sound like rocks tumbling in a dry gully. I lay there, a broken heap, the day's warmth slowly leaching from the stone into my bruised flesh. Somewhere high above, in the great hall I had cleaned hours before, someone shouted a toast. Life went on. Down here, I was just a message, written in agony and blood. Darkness lapped at the edges of my vision. The last coherent thought I had was a bitter amendment to my mother's creed. Invisibility hadn't saved me. It had just made me an easy canvas for someone else's violence. Consciousness returned as a slow, painful tide. I was drowning in softness, not the scratchy burlap of my pallet in the servants' warren, but the impossible embrace of down and linen. The air was different, clean, cold, sharp with the scent of pine and a faint, smoky spice that was undeniably male. My body was a single, solid ache, but the jagged, stabbing fire in my side had been banked to a deep, angry throb. I forced my eyes open. The room was dim, lit by a single candle on a massive oak chest. Tapestries of hunting wolves hung on stone walls. Deep furs swallowed the floor. I knew this room. I had dusted its surfaces, never daring to linger, never touching a thing. The Alpha King's private chambers. Terror, cold and slick, poured through me. I tried to push myself up, and a wounded gasp tore from my throat as my ribs shrieked in protest. "Do not move." The voice came from the corner, a low rumble that vibrated in the marrow of my bones. He emerged from the shadows, a silhouette that seemed to draw all the light toward him. Theron. He was out of his formal furs, dressed in a simple dark tunic, his hair tied loosely back. He held a wooden cup, tendrils of steam curling from its rim. He approached the bed, and I flinched back, a tremor seizing my core. He stopped, his storm-cloud eyes taking inventory, the swelling he could see on my face, the way I cradled my torso. "You have 2 cracked ribs," he stated, his voice devoid of its usual courtroom thunder. It was flat, precise. A concussion, numerous contusions. He extended the cup. "Drink, it will dull the pain." My hand shook as I took it. Our fingers did not touch. The liquid inside was bitter, but a wave of warmth sped through my chest as I swallowed. I could not meet his gaze. "My king, I am sorry for the mess. I will return to my duties." "You will do no such thing." He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, the movement fluid for a man of his size. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and studied me with an intensity more terrifying than any shout. Who did this? The question hung in the air, heavy as an anvil. I stared into the murky depths of the cup. The safe lie was right there, rehearsed. I didn't see their faces, it was dark. A lie that would avoid conflict, let me slip back into the shadows. But the memory of their laughter, the taste of my own blood, the sound of my own bones breaking, it rose up in me, a wave of fury so sharp it stole my breath. For 2 years I had been silent. For 2 years I had been nothing. I lifted my head. The movement sent fresh pain lancing through my neck. I looked into the eyes of the most dangerous wolf in the territory. "Garvin's men," I whispered, my voice a raw scrape. "The ones who smell of riverstone. I know their faces." Theron did not react with fury. He went utterly, preternaturally still. The air in the room thickened, charged. The candle flame guttered. "3 of them," I continued, "the dam broken. They said it was a message for you." He was silent for a long, endless moment. Then he nodded once, a sharp, decisive cut of his chin. "Rest," he commanded, but it was softer than before. "You are under my protection now. No one will touch you again." He rose and left without another word. The door closed with a soft, definitive click. I was alone in the alphaking's bed, wrapped in the scent of pine and storm. I had just handed 3 men their death warrants. I had stepped out of the shadows and into a searing, unwelcome light. And as the medicinal draft pulled me back under, a treacherous, tiny part of me, the omega core I had spent years suffocating, stirred. It felt the echo of his power, the absolute certainty in his words. For the first time since my mother died, that hidden part did not feel afraid. It felt, inexplicably, seen. A week passed in the gilded prison of Theron's chambers. My body knitted itself together with agonizing slowness, each breath a reminder of boots and stone. The world outside the thick oak door was a muffled symphony of tension I felt in my bones. Theron's justice had been swift and public. The 3 men were gone, their blood scrubbed from the courtyard cobbles, but the stain of their execution lingered in the air, a metallic tang of fear and upheaval. My only visitor was Silas, Theron's beta and shadow, a man of few words and pragmatic calm. He brought food, news, and unspoken warnings. "The pack is divided," he said one evening, placing a tray beside the bed. "Some see the Alpha's actions as strong. Others whisper. They say he is compromised, that an Omega has clouded his judgment." "There is no cloud," I snapped, the frustration of confinement boiling over. "He feels responsible, that's all." Silas gave me a look that saw too much. "He executed 3 of Garvin's favored warriors and openly threatened the elder for you, Alara. In our world, that is a declaration louder than any mating vow." I turned my face to the wall. I hadn't asked for this. I'd wanted the shadows back. Theron visited, but his visits were strained, silent battles. He would stand in the doorway, a monument of contained power, and ask about my pain, my sleep. His answers were clipped. His eyes would linger on my fading bruises, and a muscle in his jaw would tick, but he offered no comfort. He was a king holding a line, and I was a disputed territory. The bond, that strange humming awareness that had sparked when he found me, was a live wire between us. We were magnets of opposing force, caught between a push of necessity and a pull we both fiercely resisted. One night, the silence shattered. "I need to leave this room," I said, my voice too loud in the firelit quiet. "I need air, to walk somewhere that isn't here." He didn't look up from the map he was studying. No. The denial was a slap. "I am not a prisoner. You are under protection. It is the same thing." "For how long?" I demanded, swinging my legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the protest in my side. "Until Garvin gets bored? Until you decide I'm no longer a useful piece in your game?" That made him look up. His gaze was a physical weight. "This is not a game. It feels like one. My life is the prize, and everyone is gambling but me." My breath hitched, pain flaring. "You made me a target, Theron. The least you can do is look at me when you dictate my existence." The use of his name hung in the air. He slowly rolled the map, his movements deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was low, each word a chip of ice. "I think I do not see you. I see every flinch when a door closes too loud. I see the way you measure the distance to the window. I see the shadow in your eyes that wasn't there before they put it there." He took a step closer. The firelight carved his face in sharp relief. "I see you, Alara, more clearly than you see yourself. You are not a pawn. You are the reason the board is shaking." His words stole the air from my lungs. They weren't gentle. They were a brutal acknowledgement. "Then let me stand on the board," I whispered. "Hiding me here doesn't make me safer. It makes me look weaker. It proves Garvin right." For a long moment, he just stared at me, conflict a storm behind his eyes. The bond thrummed with his frustration, his fear, his grim resolve. "Tomorrow," he said, finally, the word a concession, "you may walk the Upper East Corridor with Silas, no further, and you return at the first sign of trouble." It was a tiny victory. I nodded, my anger dissolving into shaky exhaustion. He gave me one last inscrutable look, then turned back to the fire. The Upper East Corridor felt like a foreign country. Sunlight streamed through high, narrow windows. The air was cooler, carrying the distant scent of the stables and the pine forest beyond the walls. I walked slowly, Silas a silent, watchful presence a pace behind. Servants scurried past, their eyes darting to me, then quickly away. Whispers trailed in their wake like smoke. "That's her, the Omega, the one who caused the executions." My skin crawled. I had traded invisibility for infamy. We rounded a corner and nearly collided with a group of young warriors. Garvin's scent, riverstone and resentment, rolled off them. They fanned out, blocking the way. The leader, an alpha with a sneer and cold eyes, looked me over. "Look what wandered out of the royal kennel, the alpha's new pet. Does he have you on a leash, or do you just heel on command?" My heart hammered against my sore ribs. My Omega instinct screamed to submit, to lower my eyes and edge away. But a hotter, newer fire surged, born of pain and a week in a cage. I met his gaze. "The Alpha's justice has a long reach. I'm sure you remember its taste from the courtyard." His sneer vanished, replaced with raw fury. He took a step forward. "You little—" "Roland?" Silas's voice cut through the tension. He hadn't moved, but his presence seemed to expand. "The Lady Alara is under the king's protection. You will step aside now." The title Lady hung in the air, absurd and potent. Roland's eyes flicked between me and Silas, rage warring with self-preservation. With a final venomous glare, he shoved past, his followers scrambling after him. I let out a trembling breath. My hands were clenched into fists. "That was unwise," Silas murmured. "Was it?" I asked, my blood singing with a strange, defiant energy. Hiding didn't protect me. Maybe standing won't either, but at least I'm facing the threat. We continued the walk, but the encounter had changed something. The ghost was learning how to be solid. As we neared the end of the corridor, a small, forgotten balcony came into view, overlooking the training yards. I moved toward it, drawn by the open air. Silas started to object, but I was already stepping out. The scene below was a controlled chaos of clashing wood and shouted commands, and in the center of it all was Theron, shirtless, his torso a map of old scars and corded muscle. He moved with a lethal, breathtaking grace, disarming two opponents at once. Power radiated from him, a palpable force even from this distance. He was magnificent and utterly terrifying. As if feeling my gaze, he froze mid-motion, his head snapped up. His eyes, even from the balcony, found mine instantly. The connection was a physical jolt. The hum between us became a resonant chord. In that moment, I saw past the king. I saw the raw, untamed alpha, the wolf beneath the skin, and my omega, the part I had denied for so long, recognized its match. Theron's expression didn't change, but his grip on his practice sword tightened. He gave me one long, searing look that held a universe of warning and promise, then turned back, attacking with renewed, brutal intensity. I stepped back from the rail, my legs unsteady. The realization crashed over me, cold and irrevocable. This was no longer about protection or debt. The bond was real, it was growing, and it changed everything. The summons arrived on heavy parchment, sealed with Theron's crest, a mountain peak under a full moon. The Alpha King requests the presence of Alara before the Pack Council. It wasn't a request, it was a command that turned my blood to ice. The council was where laws were made and challenges issued. It was no place for an Omega, let alone a servant. I was to be paraded before the wolves who thought me a weakness. At midday, Silas escorted me into the circular chamber of dark stone. A ring of tables faced the dais where Theron's throne sat, empty. He stood before it, a pillar of black and gray. Every elder, captain, and influential alpha was there. All conversation died as I entered. Their collective gaze was a physical pressure. I followed Silas to a solitary chair placed just left of the dais, a place for a witness or an accused. Theron's voice rang out. "This council is convened to address an act of treason, the assault on a member of this pack within these walls." A murmur. A member of this pack. Elder Alastair, white-bearded and neutral, rose. "My king, with respect, the individual was a servant. The laws regarding discipline of servants are flexible." "She was not being disciplined," Theron said, his voice dangerously soft. "Her blood was a message against your king. That makes it an attack on the pack itself." He had trapped them. To deny me protection was to admit their own safety was conditional. Garvin, seated with his supporters, scowled but remained silent. "The perpetrators are dealt with," Alastair conceded. "Must we now elevate a servant and disrupt the natural order? It sets a dangerous precedent." "The precedent," Theron countered, his gaze sweeping the room, is that no one here is beneath my protection. An injury to one is an insult to all. That is the natural order of a strong pack. Or have we become a collection of clans where the weak are offered to settle scores? His words were a challenge. The room stirred uncomfortably. Then Garvin rose. He was an older alpha, his strength and cunning. Noble words, my king, but let us speak plainly. This is not about protection. It is about possession. His oily gaze slid to me. We all feel it. The tension, the connection. You have an attachment. Your judgment is clouded. You threaten civil war over a feeling. He had said the unsayable. He had given voice to the bond humming in the air. Heat flooded my face. Theron finally turned. He looked at me, not at Garvin. His gaze was a question and a command. He was handing me the knife. I stood up. The movement caused a ripple of shock, an omega rising unbidden. My legs felt like water, but I made my voice carry. Elder Garvin speaks of feelings, I said, my voice clear but thin. What I felt was my ribs breaking. What I felt was the cold stone while his loyal warriors laughed. The king's judgment saw that for what it was, terrorism. You call it an attachment. I call it a leader doing his duty. Would you have him ignore a knife held to the pack's throat because the handle was carved from someone you deem unimportant? Garvin's eyes narrowed. You speak boldly for a ghost. Do you believe you are worth the blood spilled, worth the division you sow? It was the question that had haunted me. I looked at the hostile faces, the curious ones. I looked at Theron. He was watching me, utterly still, but the bond thrummed with a fierce, protective pride. I turned back to Garvin. My worth is not for you to decide, but the king's word is law. He declared my safety a matter of pack security. By attacking me, you weren't targeting a servant. You were testing the law, testing him. And now, taking a step forward, you are afraid because the test failed. Your move was answered with daylight and steel. That is not the act of a clouded mind. That is the act of a king. Silence, absolute and profound, followed my words. I had reframed the conflict. It wasn't a scandal. It was a power struggle, and Garvin had blinked first. Garvin's face was pure hatred. He had expected a cowering Omega. He had not expected a counterstrike. Theron chose that moment to speak, his voice filling the silence like a thunderclap. The council has heard. The law is clear. Garvin, you are stripped of your command. You will retire to your holdings and consider your loyalty. It was a brutal punishment. Garvin looked stricken. His supporters surged up, protests erupting. Theron didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at them, and one by one, under the weight of that gaze, they fell silent and sat down. Council is adjourned, he stated. He turned and left the dais. As he passed my chair, his hand brushed my shoulder, the lightest touch. A spark shot through me, and the bond sang. It was an acknowledgement. Then he was gone. I walked out on trembling legs, the eyes of the pack burning into my back. I had walked into a den of wolves and emerged a player. But as we moved through the corridors, the euphoria faded, replaced by a deeper chill. Garvin's look of hatred was etched behind my eyes. This wasn't over. The next attack wouldn't come with fists. It would come with teeth. The victory in the council chamber was Pyrrhic. It branded me not just as protected, but as political. The fortress simmered with a new, more complex tension. Respect from some, seething resentment from others. Theron granted me more freedom, a larger circuit of the upper fortress, always with a guard. My cage had expanded, but the walls were still there. The bond was a constant, humming presence, a tether I both resented and relied upon. We spoke little, the unspoken thing between us too large for words. It lived in glances, in the way the air stilled when we were in the same room. I found solace in a forgotten library, a dusty room of ancient histories. There, I read of the old laws, which spoke of Omegas as treasured members of the pack, bearers of peace. That world was long gone. One evening, buried in a journal, I found a passage that froze my blood. It spoke of an alpha brought low not by a rival's strength, but by a whisper in the ear of his bonded omega. The bond, our greatest strength, can also be the chink in the alpha's armor. A chink in the armor. Is that what I was? Not a weakness of feeling, but a tactical vulnerability. If an enemy couldn't get to the king directly, they could get to him through me. The bond itself was the conduit. My fear crystallized. Theron's protectiveness wasn't just about justice, it was a military strategy, securing the perimeter. I was a position to be held. I must have made a sound because his voice came from the doorway. The dust in here is enough to choke a wolf. He stood in the entrance, filling the space. How long had you been watching? Finding solace in history? He asked. Understanding, I corrected. His gaze sharpened. And what do you understand? I held up the journal. Why Garvin's men came for me, and why you keep me close. It's not about me, it's about the bond. It's a weakness they can exploit. He was silent, then walked to the window. For decades, this pack has worshipped strength to the exclusion of all else. Compassion seen as frailty. What happened to you was the symptom. Garvin believes power is a club. He believes my protection of you is sentiment, a flaw. He turned to me. They are wrong. Protecting you is an act of strength. It is a declaration that my pack is a chain of loyalty. Every link is essential. To break one is to weaken all. His words painted a different picture from the cold strategist I'd imagined. So I'm a symbol? You are a person who was wronged, he said firmly. The symbol is what we make of it. We can let them use you to prove cruelty wins, or we can use this to prove this pack still has a soul. He paused. But it requires courage. The bond complicates things. It gives them a target, but it also gives us an advantage they cannot understand. What advantage? Trust, he said simply. A bonded pair, truly united, is a fortress. They see one point to attack. They fail to see that attacking one means facing the fury of both. He was speaking of the bond as a fact. My breath hitched. We are not bonded. A ghost of a smile. Aren't we? You feel it. I feel it. The pack feels it. Denying it doesn't make it less real. It just makes us unprepared. He was right. The connection was a constant hum. What do we do? I whispered. We proceed with caution and we prepare for the storm. Garvin will strike again, and next time it will not be a beating. His eyes hardened. He will come for your life in a way he believes I cannot retaliate against. The bluntness should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like finally seeing the enemy clearly. Then we need to be ready. He nodded. We do. Starting tomorrow, you will train. Train? To fight? To survive, he said. To run, to hide, to use your senses. Silas will teach you. Your omega instincts are sharper than you know. You sensed the ambush that day, didn't you? A shift in the air. I had. A moment before they appeared, the hair on my neck had stood up. I'd dismissed it. You must learn to listen to that, Theron said, to trust it. Your wolf is not a weakness to be silenced, Elora. Your wolf is your first and best defender. It is time you met her. The training was nothing like I expected. No swords. Silas began with simple exercises in the quiet chambers. Close your eyes, breathe. Tell me what you smell. At first it was just the obvious, pine, smoke, wool, but as I focused, the world unfurled into a tapestry of scent. The beeswax from the library, the sweet oatcake from lunch, the metallic tang of the distant forge, Silas's own scent of leather and parchment. Good. Now listen, beyond the fire. I heard the distant echo of a guard's footsteps 3 corridors away, the skitter of a mouse, the sigh of wind against stone. Your senses, Elora, are an omega's birthright. You are built to perceive the mood of the pack, the approach of danger. You have been stifling them. Now you must open them wide. We moved to empty rooms. He would hide, and I had to find him using only scent and sound. At first, I failed miserably. Then, slowly, I began to pick out the whisper of his breathing. Next came movement, how to fall, how to twist out of a grab, how to use my smaller size to slip past, how to run in a zigzag, using obstacles. Your goal is not to win a fight, Silas drilled. Your goal is to break contact, to create distance and get to safety. You are the alarm bell, not the sword. It was exhausting and exhilarating. My body learned a new language. My omega began to unfurl. She was cautious but cunning. She noticed the way Silas's weight shifted before he moved. One afternoon, Theron watched from the doorway. I didn't see him arrive, but I felt him, a sudden magnetic pull. I froze mid-maneuver. Silas caught my arm. His expression was inscrutable. Continue. His presence was a distraction, but it also sharpened my senses. I could smell the frost and pine of him over everything. I could hear his steady heartbeat across the room. When the session ended, he approached. You are learning. I'm trying. The bond, he said, will heighten everything, your senses, your instincts. It can feel like a storm in your blood. You must learn to ride it, not fight it. Let it sharpen you. He was so close. The urge to step closer was a physical ache. My omega whined in recognition. I saw his own control waver, a flicker in his irises. He took a deliberate step back. Garvin is gathering allies beyond the mountains. He will return, and he will not come alone. The moment shattered, replaced by cold reality. When? Soon. The training must intensify. You must be ready. The next time danger comes, you will not be a message. You will be the objective. He left me in the dusty room with the scent of him and a new kind of fear. Not blind panic, but the cold, clear fear of a soldier seeing the enemy on the horizon. That night, I lay in the bed that smelled of him and listened. I parsed the scents on the air, and deep within, my omega, no longer cowering, stood watch with me. We were preparing for a war we didn't start, but for the first time, we wouldn't be facing it on our knees. The first true sign of the coming storm was a silence. The normal sounds from the frontier, distant howls, trade bells, faded, then ceased. The forests beyond the walls became a watching void. The pack felt it. A tension wound through the stronghold, tightening with each passing day. My training took on a grim urgency. Silas pushed me harder. We moved to the fortress corridors at night, simulating escapes. I learned guard rotations, choke points, hidden alcoves. I was mapping my prison with the eye of a strategist. Theron was gone more often, riding the borders. The bond stretched thin over the miles, a taut, humming wire. When he returned, it was like a missing piece slotted back into place. We spoke little. The unspoken thing had grown too large. One evening, as cold rain lashed the stone, Captain Rorik burst into the council room. "My king! A border post, gone silent. A scout made it back. He's in bad shape." The scout was carried in, pale and shivering. The scent of blood clung to him. "Ambush," he gasped. "Not rogues. Organized. Their tactics. It was Garvin's way. They overran the post." He clutched Theron's wrist. "They're gathering in the Blackwood. More than we thought. They have a witch with them." A chill swept the room. A witch. Humans who trafficked in forbidden magic. For Garvin to ally with one was a depth of treachery that shocked everyone. Theron's face was stone. "How many?" "Hundreds," the scout whispered, before darkness took him. The room erupted. "Send a war party? Fortify?" Theron silenced them. "This is not an invasion. It is a coup. He means to strike here, at the heart." His gaze landed on me, and the bond flared with protective ferocity. His target is the throne, and to get it, he will try to remove what he believes is my weakness. All eyes turned to me. I was the strategic linchpin. "We must send you away," Elder Alastair said, "to a neighboring pack. It is the only way." "No," we said it together. We looked at each other, surprised. "If I run, he wins. He proves I am a liability you had to hide. It shatters the symbol. It undermines everything." Theron nodded. "She stays, but we do not wait for him to lay siege. We know where he is gathering. We take the fight to him." A bold, aggressive strike. It would leave the fortress under strength, but it was a statement. The king does not hide, he hunts. The war council lasted into the night. I listened, absorbing it all. When they filed out, leaving us alone with the maps, the silence was vast. "You should have let them send you away," he said quietly. "It would have been safer." "Safety is an illusion," I replied. "You taught me that. Strength doesn't run." He finally looked at me, and the raw pride in his eyes was breathtaking. "When did you become so fierce?" "When I realized my silence was a weapon they used against me. When I realized I had something worth fighting for." He stepped closer, the map-strewn table between us. "The bond," he said, his voice a low rumble. "In the Blackwood, with a witch present, it could be used against us. She could try to twist it, to sever it." The thought was a new horror. "What do we do?" "We strengthen it," he said, his gaze holding mine. "We forge it into a tool. A true bond, fully acknowledged, is harder to break." He reached across the table, his hand open, an invitation. "Will you trust me, Alara? Not as your king, as your—" He didn't finish. "Alpha, mate." This was the precipice. Accepting this was accepting everything. The danger, the relentless pull. It was surrendering the last vestige of my ghostly independence. But it was also claiming a power, a partnership. I looked at his hand, then into his eyes. I saw not just a king, but the wolf who had stood over me in the dark. I placed my hand in his. The moment our skin touched, the hum erupted into a symphony. The bond bloomed. It was like a door in my soul swinging wide open. I felt his resolve, his strategic mind, his fear for me, and beneath it, a respect and longing so profound it shook me. And in return, he felt my fear, my courage, my stubborn will, and the fragile, growing trust I placed in him. He didn't pull me closer. He simply held my hand, his thumb brushing my knuckles. When he opened his eyes, they held a new, settled certainty. "When we ride for the Blackwood," he said, his voice thick, "you will be by my side, not hidden. You are my pack's heart, and its heart does not cower when the teeth are bared." The plan was madness, taking an Omega into a battle zone, but it was also a masterstroke. It showed utter confidence. The following days were a whirlwind. I was given a swift mare. Theron oversaw the selection of my personal guard. The night before departure, the pack gathered in the courtyard. They stood in the freezing air, hundreds of them. No speeches. They simply watched as we mounted. Then, as one, they tilted their heads back and howled. It was not a howl of mourning, but of defiance, a promise carried on the wind. "We are here. We remember. We are your strength." The sound followed us long after the fortress vanished behind the trees. The journey north was a descent into a world of white silence. The cold was brutal. We traveled for days, my senses our early warning, picking up distant patrols. After a week, we reached the edge of the Blackwood. The forest was of ancient ice-sheathed willows, tinkling like crystal. The air thrummed with a low psychic vibration, the echo of Garvin's gathered power. We found them in a clearing. Garvin stood at the forefront, and beside him a slight, hooded figure, the witch. Garvin's voice boomed. "Leon, you bring your pet into the wilds? Will you let her bleed here to save your pride?" Theron walked forward, a lone figure facing the mob.
"This ends now, Garvin. Your grievance is with me. These wolves need not die for your ambition. Stand down. Face me alone." It was the oldest challenge. Pure. Simple. Garvin laughed. "I don't want your throne by your rules. I want it over your corpse and the corpse of everything you've polluted our pack with." His eyes locked on me, starting with her. He raised a hand. The witch lifted hers. A wave of force, visible as a ripple, shot from the witch's hand, straight toward me. Time seemed to slow. I saw Silas move. Too far. I felt Theron's roar of fury through the bond. The attack hit. Not pain. Separation. The world became distant, muffled. The bond, that constant, warm hum, was shrouded in static. Then silence. A yawning void where Theron's presence was. I could see him shouting, but I couldn't feel him. It was the most profound loneliness. The witch had severed it. Garvin sneered. "Now, little Omega, let's see how brave you are when you're truly alone." Panic threatened to swallow me. I was adrift. But as I stood there, severed, my Omega lifted her head, and she listened not for a bond that was gone, but with the senses she had always had. I heard the rebels breathing, smelled their fear. I saw Garvin's eyes flicker to his witch for reassurance, and I saw Theron, a silent storm of rage, his eyes on me, willing me to see. The bond was silent, but the lesson remained. Trust is the armor. I took a shaky breath. I am not alone. I pointed at the witch. Her magic is a blanket. It smothers, but it is thin. She cannot hold and fight. She is their weakness. It was a guess, a desperate gamble. Theron's eyes blazed with understanding. "All arrows, the witch!" The order was a pivot. A volley flew at the single hooded figure. The witch shrieked, throwing up a barrier. The effort broke her concentration. The world snapped back into focus. Sound rushed in, and the bond slammed back into place with the force of a collapsing star, a roaring relief and fury. The void was gone. I was whole. Garvin, seeing his advantage vanish, roared and charged. The battle was joined. It was chaos. Theron's warriors met the ragged charge and broke it. I saw Theron and Garvin find each other, a whirlwind in the center. My guard closed around me. I wasn't a fighter, but I was a lookout. "Left flank, they're circling," I shouted, smelling the attempt. "Archers near the tall pine." My warnings let our captains adjust, counter, crush each threat. The fight was brutal but short. Garvin's force, based on resentment and magic, crumbled. I watched as Theron disarmed Garvin and forced him to his knees. The drumming stopped. The last rebels threw down their weapons. Theron didn't kill Garvin. He looked down at him with contempt. "You sought to break us with fear and tricks. You failed, because a pack united by trust."
The return to the fortress was not a victory march, but a somber procession. We brought Garvin in chains, a broken symbol of a broken rebellion. The pack within the walls greeted us with complex silence, relief tangled with the sorrow of lost kin. I rode beside Theron, no longer looking like a ghost, but with a stillness in my eyes that came from facing a storm. The bond between us was different now, tempered, a deep, resonant chord of quiet awareness. We didn't need words. A glance, a shift in the bond's frequency was enough. It was unsettlingly intimate, yet it was the one thing that felt unequivocally true. Garvin's official punishment was exile and the severing of his ties to the pack, a social death. As he was dragged away, his final scream was a curse. "You think you've won. You've only made your weakness permanent. The pack will rot from the inside." His words left a stain. Rot. It echoed in the quiet halls. Peace, we learned, was a garden that needed constant tending. Theron formalized my role, decreeing the establishment of the Sentinel Corps, led by Lady Sentinel Ilara, to be consulted on all matters of pack well-being. It was a title that fit. I had a den of my own now, a sunlit solarium where Omegas came to learn, to share, to hone the gifts they'd been taught to hide. But gardens have shadows. The deepest shadows are cast by the tallest trees. The first crack appeared among the children. In the training yard, I watched an alpha pup, the son of a resentful captain, taunt a smaller beta boy struggling with his shift. "Your dad's a scout, shouldn't you be able to sniff it out?" The beta boy dissolved into human form, shivering with shame. It was a small moment, swiftly corrected by the training master, but it was a crack. The old poison, that worth was tied to birth, was being passed down. I reported it to Theron as a sentinel, not a tattletale. "He's the father's," he said, weary. "They nurse their pride from the old days. They teach that resentment to their sons." "We have to change the teaching," I said. And so we built a school, not just for combat, but for history, law, the values of unity. We faced resistance. Alphas learn by doing, the traditionalists grumbled. We pushed forward. The children, Alpha, Beta, and Omega, were curious sponges. To them, an Omega teacher was not strange. It was simply the way things were. Yet the undercurrent persisted. Whispers in the mess, a shipment of wool for school uniforms misplaced, petty, grating sabotage. The bond became a seismograph, registering the tremors of discontent deep within the pack's foundation. Then came the refugees, first one, then another, then a trickle, Omegas from distant packs, fleeing purges inspired by talk of the mountain pack's instability. Our haven was becoming a beacon for the persecuted, and a target for those who feared change. Theron stood before the map, his face grim. "We are not just reforming ourselves. We have become a symbol of a threat to the entire old order. Our enemies are not coming with armies of ice now. They are coming with lies, with gold, with the justification to restore order to a rogue pack." The unquiet peace was over. The battle for the pack's soul had entered a new, more insidious phase.
The refugees were a crisis and a lightning rod. We housed them, gave them work. Their stories were harrowing, their gratitude profound, but their presence fueled the traditionalists' fear. "He fills our den with cast-offs, weakens our blood." The external pressure mounted. Missives from neighboring alphas expressed concern, a diplomatic siege. They were isolating us, painting us as dangerous radicals. Then the thefts began. Medical supplies, tools, then the silver dust reserves, the very material we used to seal magical thin spots, were found depleted. A slow, consistent pilfering. Silas investigated, his face grim. An inside job, someone with knowledge. A fifth column, the enemy was within. The atmosphere curdled into mutual suspicion. Warriors eyed refugees with hostility, refugees huddled in fear. The vibrant hope of spring soured into a tense, paranoid summer. The breaking point was the Summer Solstice Festival. It was meant to heal rifts. I was dancing with Omega children when a scream cut the music. A fight had broken out near the ale barrels. The same alpha pup, Tarn, now older, was squaring off against a refugee Omega youth. "You looked at her," Tarn snarled, drunk and furious. "You foreign filth think you can eye our women?" It was about to explode. Theron was there in an instant, a cool, suppressing force. "This ends now." He handled it justly, but it satisfied no one. The festive mood was shattered. Later, in our chambers, Theron's weariness was profound. "I am losing them, Ilara. The enemy is in their hearts, speaking in the voice of their own fears." "We need to find the source," I said. "This is organized."
The break came from Anya, the refugee from the north. "The poison at the springs," she whispered, her face pale. "The way it was made, it is not just to kill, it is to create a landmark for scrying, a beacon in the spirit world, a doorway for something else to look through." A chill crawled down my spine. The theft, the desecration, it was preparation. The hot springs were now a spiritual bullseye. We had to act. Evidence pointed to Captain Devora's household, the scent of Riverstone, Garvin's old signature, cryptic words from his men. With Theron, we raided his quarters. We found a clay jar of the poisonous mixture in a storage closet. Wrapped around it was a child's braided wristband. Tarn's. The evidence was damning, yet it felt staged. Tarn, brought in for questioning, was terrified, denying everything. "I lost that band weeks ago." I believed him. This was the fear of a child being used, not the guilt of a saboteur. "Captain," I said to Devore, "look at him. Do you believe him capable of this?" Devore stared at his weeping son, horror dawning. He had been so busy nursing his own grievances, he had failed to see his son being manipulated. "The healer," he whispered, "from the southern caravan, Heston's man. He visited. He must have taken the band." The southern healer, the quiet man with an interest in spiritual corruption. He hadn't just smuggled ingredients, he had groomed the resentful, planted evidence, hoping to trigger an internal purge. The Harbinger was a weapon deployed by the Southern Coalition. But as we left, the bond twinged. A memory. The archives. The scent on the restricted parchment. Oren paled. The cells. The prisoner's escort passes the archive corridor. Garvin. The river remembered its course, and its most patient tributary was in a cell, whispering through the bars, weaving his knowledge of magic and malice into our discord. The Harbinger was an idea, an infection, and its patient zero was the fallen rebel, plotting our ruin from the dark. Confronting Garvin was like stepping into a silent storm cell. He sat clean and composed in his cell. "The gardeners returned to the weed," he said, a chill smile on his lips. "The poison at the springs, the southern healer, the framed child, you orchestrated it," Theron stated. Garvin spread his hands. "I, a prisoner? I have only words. If others found truth in them and acted, is that my sin? Or is it the sin of the one who built his house on sand, knowing the river would one day flow?" He was a master of deflection. He wouldn't confess. He would only prophesy. "The southern alphas do not fear you," he said, his gaze locking on me with glacial contempt. "They are embarrassed by you. You are a living insult. They will come for cleansing, and the rot you've nurtured will make their victory swift." He had just confirmed everything, their intent, their method. They would leverage our rot to justify an intervention. We had to discredit the narrative. We had to heal the rot before they could point to it. First, reconciliation. Theron forced a raw, painful meeting between Captain Devore and the refugee youth. It ended not in friendship, but in grim understanding. Devore's faction, shamed, lost its fire. Second, transparency. Theron called the pack together and laid everything bare. Garvin's manipulation, the southern plot. "They think we are divided," he roared. "Let them look. Let them see a pack that has chosen to stand together anyway." The response was a unifying roar. The refugees became fellow victims. Our ways became our identity, the very thing the enemy wanted to destroy. Third, the diplomatic offensive. We would not wait. Theron announced we would attend the gathering of alphas at the neutral Stone River territory. We would go not as supplicants, but as a king and his advisor. I would go with him. The risk was monumental. We would be walking into the lion's den. The journey was tense. The council was held in a vast pavilion by a roaring river. A dozen alphas were present, including the coalition leader, Alpha Varric of the Southern Sun, a golden-maned giant with flinty eyes. Heston stood at his shoulder, smug. We entered. All conversation died. Every gaze was a weight of disdain. I walked beside Theron, my head high, the sentinel's mark clear on my neck. Varric spoke, not looking at me. You bring an attendant. I bring my mate and chief advisor, Alara, Lady Sentinel of the Mountain Pack. The titles were a challenge. An alpha snorted. Advisor? What next? Omega generals? I kept my face serene. Your calm is the rebuttal. We are here, Theron continued, because we have heard this council views my pack as a threat, as unstable. I am here to show you the truth of that instability. He gestured. Silas stepped forward and placed the evidence on the central stone. The poison jar, the child's wristband, Heston's ledger detailing the plot and naming Varric. The pavilion erupted. Varric was on his feet, denying, blustering. Theron's voice cut through the chaos. You speak of the natural order, but what is natural about poisoning wells, manipulating children, using a fallen king's hate to break a pack from within? He turned his gaze on each alpha. You fear our model because it works. You fear it because it proves your strength is a hollow shell, propped up by fear. He had them. The moral high ground crumbled. They had been exposed as conspirators, not preservers. Alpha Brond of Stone River, the host, stood. These accusations are grave. This council cannot discuss intervention based on a compromised premise. The sovereignty of the Mountain Pack is not in question. It was a staggering victory. The coalition fractured in the light of exposed treachery. The journey home was lighter, but the bond hummed with no triumph, only weary relief and resolve. The immediate threat was neutralized. But the river, as Garvin said, remembered its course. It would seek new channels.
True peace, when it finally came, was not a fanfare, but a deep, collective exhalation. The fortress, no longer braced for the next blow, seemed to settle into its stones with a weary sigh. The school's chatter became background music. Sentinel patrols were routine, their reports more often about a resolved quarrel or a detected illness than a looming threat. Theron and I found a rhythm in leadership that needed fewer words, the bond a seamless conduit for shared purpose. Garvin was transferred to a remote, isolated tower, fed and forgotten. His poison was drained by irrelevance. The hot springs, with Anya's guidance and the entire pack's concerted effort, slowly began to heal, the water clearing one precious inch at a time. But a final lesson awaited us. It came with the first frost of autumn. A sickness swept through the eastern wing of the fortress, not a magical blight, but a fierce, mundane fever. It struck warriors and servants alike, relentless and democratic. The healers were overwhelmed. My sentinels and I worked tirelessly, not as seers, but as hands, changing linens, brewing broths, offering quiet comfort. In the thick of it, Theron fell ill. It was a shock. The unbreakable king, the storm wolf, was laid low by a simple fever. His skin burned, his breaths came shallow. I dismissed the healers from his chamber, taking watch myself. For 3 days and nights, I bathed his brow, coaxed water past his lips, and held his hand as he thrashed in delirium. In his fever dreams, he spoke, not of battles or strategy, but of his father, a colder, harder king. He spoke of the loneliness of the crown, the weight of every decision that meant life or death. He whispered apologies for men long dead, for choices that still haunted him. He called my name, not in command, but in a tone of such vulnerable need it cracked something open inside me.
The bond in his illness was not a channel of power, but a thin, fragile thread. I felt his confusion, his physical anguish, the profound fatigue of a wolf who had carried a mountain on his back for too long. And he felt my unwavering watchfulness, my fear, my steadfast, quiet love, a love we had never named aloud, but which had become the bedrock of everything. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. He awoke, weak but clear-eyed, to find me asleep in the chair beside him, my head resting on the bed, my hand still in his. He didn't speak. He simply watched me, his gray eyes soft. When I stirred, he lifted a trembling hand and brushed a strand of hair from my face. "You stayed," he rasped, his voice raw. "Where else would I be?" I whispered, my throat tight. He looked around the sunlit chamber, at the simple evidence of care, the water pitcher, the clean cloths, the quiet. "All my life," he said slowly, "I equated strength with never showing a crack, with being the unassailable rock. This being cared for, it feels like a different kind of strength." "It is," I said, squeezing his hand. "It's the strength to be vulnerable, to trust someone to see you broken and not look away. It's the strength we've been trying to give the whole pack." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. My wise sentinel. His recovery was slow. For the first time, he delegated without micromanaging. Silas and the captains handled the pack's affairs seamlessly. The world did not end because the king rested. It was a revelation. During his convalescence, we talked, really talked, not about pack business, but about childhood memories, hopes that had nothing to do with thrones, fears that had nothing to do with enemies. We spoke of the future, of the school expanding, of trade routes opening with the now chastened southern packs, of the simple, profound desire to see the hot springs fully restored. One evening, as he grew stronger, we walked together on the balcony. The autumn air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and ripe apples. The fortress below glowed with peaceful industry. "Garvin was wrong about the rot," said Theron cutely, his gaze sweeping over his domain. "The rot was the old way, the belief that to be strong, you had to be alone, that to lead, you had to be hard. We cut that out. What's growing now, it's healthier. It has deeper roots." I leaned into his side, drawing warmth from him. "It's still young. It needs tending." "We will tend it," he said, his arm coming around me. "Together." He turned me to face him, his expression solemn. "Ilara, you asked me once in that dusty library what we should do. I told you we should proceed with caution. I was wrong. Caution is for enemies. For us, I choose certainty. I choose you, not as a strategy, not as a symbol, as my mate, my heart, my equal in every way that matters. Will you stand with me, not just as sentinel and king, but as partners for all our days?" The world narrowed to his face, to the love shining, unguarded in his eyes. The bond swelled, a golden, perfect cord of alignment. There were no more shadows between us, no more unspoken fears. The last ghost, the ghost of the lonely king and the invisible Omega, had finally been laid to rest. Tears blurred my vision, but my voice was clear and sure. "I choose you, Theron. I have since the moment you asked who hurt me, and saw me, truly saw me for the first time. I will stand with you, always." His kiss was not one of passion, but of sealing, a promise, a homecoming. It was gentle, profound, and held the weight of every battle fought and every peace earned. Below us, the pack lived. They were not a perfect mosaic, but they were whole. The heart beat strong, defended not by walls of stone, but by bonds of trust, by chosen family, by a love that had refused to break. The long winter was over. The new dawn, hard-won and bright with promise, had truly begun, and we faced it, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. Together. The first snow of true winter fell not as a siege, but as a blanket. It hushed the world outside the fortress, coating the pine boughs in soft, silent white. Inside, the great hall roared with life and warmth. This was the Pack Frost Feast, a tradition older than the stones themselves, but this year it hummed with a new energy. It was not just a celebration of surviving the cold, but of thriving in the peace we had forged. I stood beside Theron at the high table, not as a guarded symbol, but as his acknowledged mate and co-ruler. The bond between us was no longer a tumultuous current or a strategic tether. It was the quiet, steady rhythm of our shared breath, as natural and essential as a heartbeat. He wore a simple circlet of dark iron, and I a matching band set with a single moonstone. We were not dressed as distant monarchs, but as the alpha and omega of a living, breathing family. The hall was a tapestry of our new reality. At one long table, veteran warriors like Corvin laughed with refugee omegas they'd once eyed with suspicion. At another, Elder Alistair was deep in debate with young beta scholars from the school. In the corner, Lyra led a group of children, alpha, beta, and omega pups all mixed together in a clapping game, their laughter ringing like bells. Mara moved through the crowd, her sharp eyes missing nothing, a silent, satisfied sentinel. Theron rose, and the hall gradually fell into a respectful hush. He did not need to command silence, it was given freely. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying easily in the fire-warmed space, "we gathered in fear. We faced enemies from without and shadows from within. We were told our ways were weak, that our unity was a flaw." His gaze swept the room, landing on familiar faces, each with their own story of that struggle. "You proved them wrong." A low, approving murmur passed through the crowd. "We proved that strength is not the absence of fear, but the courage to face it together, that the heart of a pack is not its most vulnerable point, but its source of greatest power." He reached down and took my hand, lifting it with his. This bond was called a liability. It was targeted, tested, and nearly torn apart, but you, all of you, claimed it as your own. You made it a symbol not of two people, but of our collective will to protect what we love. He looked at me then, and the love in his eyes was a public, powerful thing. Alara came to us as a ghost. She taught a king how to see. She taught a pack how to feel. She is my heart, and she has helped me find the heart of this pack once more. He turned back to the assembly. So tonight, we do not feast just to endure winter. We feast to celebrate what we have built. A pack where a warrior's worth is measured by his loyalty, not just his strength. Where an omega's wisdom is heeded as keenly as an alpha's command. Where a beta's craft is valued as essential. We feast for the sentinels who watch not just for enemies, but for sorrow, for the teachers who shape not just fighters, but thinkers, for every wolf who chose to heal instead of hate, to build instead of break. He raised his goblet. "To the pack." The response was not a ragged cheer, but a deep, resonant roar that shook the rafters. "To the pack!" As the feasting resumed, Theron and I moved among them. We were not distant icons, we were woven into the fabric of the celebration. A young alpha showed me a carving he'd made in the school. An elderly omega pressed a sprig of winterberry into Theron's hand for luck. We were theirs, and the profound, unshakable sense of belonging was a warmth that outshone any fire. Later, we stole away to the same balcony where our journey had irrevocably changed. The world was a study in monochrome, the black sky pierced by icy stars, the land a sweep of pristine white. The silence was profound, peaceful. Theron stood behind me, his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my head. "It's real," he murmured into my hair, as if confirming it to himself. It's not just a reprieve, it's a foundation. It is, I said, leaning back into his solid strength. The starlight caught in his gray eyes, turning them silver. We're not just surviving anymore, Theron. We're building a legacy. He brushed a thumb over my cheek, his expression turning solemn. When they tell our story, generations from now, what do you want them to say? I thought of the ghost in the corridor, the blood on the stones, the whispering frost, the poisoned spring, the council's glare, the children's laughter in the school, the shared howl of defiance, the healing waters. I want them to say we remembered, that when we were tested, we remembered that a pack is a chain, and that a chain is only as strong as its most vulnerable link. We didn't hide our weaknesses, we fortified them. We turned our heart into our strongest fortress. He kissed me then, a kiss that tasted of wine and winter air and a future wide open. Then that will be our story, he said against my lips. We stood there as the moon climbed, watching over the silent, snow-clad territory. No howls of challenge split the night, only the comfortable, distant calls of our own patrols, weaving an invisible net of safety over the land. The enemy was not gone forever. New challenges would rise. Drought, dispute, ambition from other quarters. The river of the old ways would always seek a new channel, but we were no longer a fragile sandcastle in its path. We were the mountain itself, reshaped and fortified, with a heart that beat strong and clear at its core. I was Alara. I had been a ghost, a message, a symbol, a sentinel, a mate. Now I was simply part of the whole. The invisible girl had helped a king see, and in doing so had helped an entire tack find its vision. Theron squeezed my hand, the bond between us pulsing with a contented, steady light. Below us, in the hall, the feast continued, a living testament to the peace we had won. The long night had ended. The dawn was here, and it was ours.